Thank you for inviting me here to speak today. I hope you all have a really tasty lunch in front of you. And as Dee said, I'm the organizing director with Beyond Plastics. We are a small nonprofit based out of Bennington College, but we are a national project working to end plastic pollution. And we are spearheaded by the wonderful Judith Enck, who is the former EPA Region 2 administrator and a visiting professor at Bennington. So I'm going to talk about plastics and climate change, but we're going to get into some intersectional issues as well, including environmental justice and plastic pollution. In October of 2021, Beyond Plastics released a report that took a comprehensive look at the, could everyone please mute themselves? I'm getting background. That's a comprehensive look at the life cycle of plastics from extraction from the ground to disposal. And that report is called The New Coal, Plastics and Climate Change, and it's available on our website. This is black and white, obviously, but I'll have the link on where you can find it. There's my email. Feel free to reach out to me, and you can also follow us on social media. And our website is beyondplastics.org. Okay, next slide. Yep, so there's where you can find the report. That's the link, bit.ly/plastic is the new coal, or you can just do a Google search for Beyond Plastics, plastic is the new coal. Next slide. So first off, it's important to understand that plastics are made from chemicals and fossil fuels. Plastics in the US today are mostly manufactured from ethane gas, which is a byproduct of hydrofracking. I'm sure you're very familiar with this in Delaware, as there is a planned project to build a liquefied natural gas port in Delaware to ship fracked gases from the Utica and Marcellus Shale Basin overseas. Next slide.
It seems like there's a delay. I do click, but it doesn't move as fast. Hopefully you're seeing the new slide. Okay.
I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the climate crisis is here. I think there's no denying that our climate is changing and that it is affecting all life on Earth at this point, and that this is a problem that needs intervention and mitigation to prevent loss of life, loss of property damage, and to preserve a healthy and safe environment for all. Next slide. As the oceans warm, which 90% of the heat that we have put into the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels has been absorbed by our oceans, we get more intense hurricanes. Next slide. And we know that 1 in 100-year storms are now becoming 1 in 10-year, 1 in 5-year storms. And this energy is, creating natural disasters at a rate that we've never seen, and that people are disproportionately affected by these natural disasters. Next slide. This is just a graph that kind of shows the situation that we're in, that the concentration of carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere is at the highest levels it's ever been since we began tracking it. Next slide. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has declared code red for humanity. We need to quickly end the extraction and combustion of fossil fuels. Next slide. And where does plastic come into this? Well, we all have seen plastic pollution in our environment. We know that our oceans are quickly turning into landfills because of the proliferation of cheap disposable plastics, mostly in the last 20 years. But because plastics are made from oil and gas, they have significant climate impacts as well. Next slide. So currently it's estimated that there is 10 billion tons of plastic in the world today. All of the plastic that has ever been made still exists. So that's more than 1 ton of plastic for every person on Earth. And half of that plastic has been made in, or more than half has been made in the last 15 years. So this is a problem that is quickly accelerating. Today, more than about half of all new plastic or single-use plastic packaging. So it's designed to be used for just a few moments, and then it is discarded where it persists for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Next slide. This is a scene from a landfill. A lot of our plastic waste in the US has been shipped overseas, actually. Most of our plastic recycling up until 2017 was shipped to China. We know that plastic recycling has not been successful in addressing plastic waste. Less than 10% of all plastic has been recycled, 12% has been incinerated, and the rest has been either landfilled or wound up in the environment. And plastic recycling is not a good solution anyway to the issue because of all the upstream impacts of producing plastic, and also because recycling doesn't really do much if we continue to make new plastic at a breakneck pace. Plastic is also really difficult to recycle because a lot of packaging and materials are mixed materials that are not recyclable. Next slide. The sound is coming with echo. Can everyone hear me okay?
I'm not hearing an echo. I think everyone's muted that I can see except you.
Okay. So once plastic winds up in the environment, it is ingested by wildlife and humans. Humans are ingesting plastic at an estimated rate of about 5 grams per week. That's the size of a credit card, and that's coming from plastic in the environment, because when it's in the environment, it breaks down into microplastics, which then are become ubiquitous in water systems and air, because water flows all over the world. And we're also breathing it because plastic is very light, and small particles of plastic get easily swept up into the air and into the jet stream where they circulate in our atmosphere. Next slide. That's the size of the amount of plastic that we're ingesting each week. You can protect yourself by not eating out of plastic if you can avoid it. Okay, and now we're going to get into climate change. So I was really surprised when I saw this, but if plastic was itself a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. Plastic, as a like an entity that emits greenhouse gases, emits more than the entire continent of Africa. So this is an environmental justice issue. That picture of the hurricane damage that we saw, the people who contribute the least to the problem often suffer more than those at the top. Next slide. So our report, The New Coal, Plastics and Climate Change, found that in 2020, the US plastics industry released as much greenhouse gas emissions as 116 coal-fired power plants. That's about 232 million tons of CO2 equivalent, and that this problem is expanding. By 2030, plastics in the US will surpass coal-fired power in terms of emissions. And that this is a violation of environmental justice because 90% of those emissions are released into just 18 communities. Next slide. The first step to make plastics is fracking. Fracking releases large amounts of methane, which is where most of those emissions are coming from. Methane easily leaks from fracking equipment, from pipelines, and methane is 89 times more potent than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere, even though methane doesn't last as long as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Next slide. This is just a cross section of what fracking looks like. Fracking also uses large amounts of water, which are then contaminated with radioactive isotopes and chemicals, and it has a high risk of contaminating drinking water as well. This is a photo of an ethane flare, which is used to manufacture plastics. Next slide. Ethane is used to manufacture plastics, not the ethane flare itself. The movie Galland is from 2010, but it's still relevant today because in 2000, there were about 2,000 fracking wells in the US. Now there are more than 1.2 million fracking wells in the US. So fracking is still an issue. It's an issue that there are more wells being drilled every year. And there are other types of infrastructure that come with fracking too. Next slide. Sorry, in 2000, there were 20,000 wells, not 2,000 wells. The next step where methane is released is through pipelines. The US has more than 3 million miles worth of pipelines for oil and gas. Next slide. We know that pipelines are an ongoing fight. The next slide shows, this is Anishinaabe leader Winona LeDuc at a protest for Line 3, which is an Enbridge pipeline. Enbridge is a Canadian company. They have since announced that Line 3 is complete, but they are still trying to build Line 5, which would go under Lake Michigan. Next slide. The really big impact of plastic production on greenhouse gas emissions is at an ethane gas cracker. This is basically a plastic factory where the ethane gas goes to be turned into plastic, polyethylene. The ethane undergoes a series of reactions that turn it into the really strong, stable molecules that we know as ethylene, which is strung together to make polyethylene plastic. This is a photo of the Shell ethane cracker that is almost complete in Monica, Pennsylvania. Next slide. Oh, I forgot to mention what the key is there. So those little symbols, each shaded symbol in this key is one coal-fired power plant. So 2 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And each unshaded symbol is how much those emissions are going to expand by 2025. So as you can see, as more ethane gas crackers come online by 2025, those emissions increase. This is a list of the communities where these ethane crackers are and the plastic pollution emissions are most concentrated. They are mostly along the Texas and Louisiana coastlines, but increasingly in the Ohio River Valley where shale gas is plentiful. These communities, next slide, are 2/3 more likely to be Black, Indigenous, and Brown people of color. This is a photo of an ethane cracker. These facilities are massive. One that is proposed in St. James Parish, Louisiana, would take up 2,000 acres, 450 of which are imperiled wetlands. That's the St. Formosa Sunshine Project. Construction has not broken ground yet on that facility, though. Next slide. And not only are they more likely to be people of color, they're more likely to earn less money. A big issue with Cancer Alley is that once a facility moves into their neighborhood, their home values plummet. I recently saw a woman in St. James Parish, Louisiana, say in a video that she couldn't sell her home for $50. So this type of environmental justice issue is an economic justice issue also. Next slide. These are some photos of frontline communities and what it looks like to live near petrochemical facilities. You can only imagine like the smell also in the air. And I have to say the emotional and mental toll that it takes is understated, because you don't know what you're breathing. You don't know if your headache is a normal headache or if it's something you should see a doctor about. You don't know what's happening to your children. You know, it can cause a lot of worry and distress. Next slide. This one surprised me, and I always include this because I want to warn people not to use foamed plastic insulation. So foamed plastic insulation seen here in the photo off gases for more than 50 years, releasing greenhouse gas emissions, but also releasing chemicals that you don't want to breathe. So if you're building your dream house or a tiny house right now or renovating, I recommend don't use foamed plastic insulation. Go for fiberglass if you can. Next slide. And of course, we have chemical recycling and waste incineration, which are basically the same thing. Chemical recycling is the new form of recycling that plastics industry is claiming is going to solve these pollution issues, but really it's just turning plastic waste into fuel to be burned or melting it to be burned. And then we have municipal waste incineration, which is already a regular practice. As I said, about 12% of all plastic is incinerated. Next slide. And plastics in our water. So we couldn't quantify how many greenhouse gas emissions are coming from this, but we do know that as plastic breaks down into microplastics, it releases greenhouse gases. And it also interferes with zootic plant life in the ocean, zootic and plant life, so algae and the plankton, from converting CO2 into oxygen. So the ocean is normally a carbon sink, but plastics interfere with our ability, with the ocean's ability to do that. Next slide. So the reason we called this report The New Coal is we think it's pretty obvious that plastic is the petrochemical industry's plan B. We know that we have to get off the combustion of fossil fuels because of the climate issues that we're dealing with. And they don't want to stop extracting fossil fuels, so they want to turn it into plastic to preserve their markets. And that's why we think that this is they're honing in on this to preserve basically the economics of extraction. Next slide. But it's not true that plastics, turning fossil fuels into plastic doesn't affect our climate. We know that it does. We know that this is a big piece of the issue, and we need groups, climate groups, to talk about plastics more, and we need media to talk about plastics when they're talking about the climate, and our regulators to understand this connection. Next slide. Because we don't have another option. This is the only home that we have. I know some people like to think about Mars as an alternative, but the fact is that Mars has no atmosphere, Mars has no liquid water, and Mars has no soil. We really are the Goldilocks planet, and I love this planet, and I think we should do everything we can to save it. Next slide. So here are some things that we do. We offer a course on plastic pollution. Registration is open right now. You can go to beyondplastics.org if you want to take this course. Not only do we cover the issue in depth, but we cover public action skills so that you can take action on plastic pollution. Next slide. We're building a robust grassroots movement to pass legislation. So while individual action is important, it's not the biggest piece of the puzzle. We really need legislative action to stem the tide of plastic production. Here are some acts that I support. Beyond Plastics supports the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act and ending fossil fuel subsidies. And we are, something that I do is help people organize constituent meetings to educate their legislators on the plastics issue and why they should support legislation that takes action on plastics. Next slide. These are the organizing strategies that we use. We're building the grassroots movement, like I said. We are about to launch a massive new grassroots strategy to help people organize into local groups acting on plastic pollution where they're at. So kind of like the Sunrise Movement, but working on plastics and bringing in the environmental justice and the climate groups as well. We want to grow it organically and not poach organizers from other groups. So we're about to launch that. We're in the midst of a soft launch, and I will definitely send you more information on that because current groups will be able to become affiliates and work on plastics too. Next slide. Here's an action that I did. The image isn't loading. Oh, there it is. Okay. Here's an action that I did with some organizers in New York's capital region. There's an incinerator there called the Norlight Hazardous Waste Incinerator. That photo on the left is from MLK Day in 2021, where they had a hazardous waste spill. It caught on fire and there was an open burn. We've been organizing to shut this incinerator down for 3 years, and we had an action where we planted sunflowers around the neighborhood because there's a public housing project right next to it. Next slide. And the idea of planting sunflowers was a healing way to bring attention to the issue, and it was inspired by peace activist Kathy Kelly. She was arrested in the 1980s for planting corn on a nuclear missile silo in Kansas City, Missouri. And she had come to our neighborhood for a talk. We were all really inspired by her bravery, so we wanted to do that healing action for the community. Next slide. We had a meme contest last year because one of our goals is to get this message in front of as many people as possible, and we have to get creative sometimes. So here are some memes that we made. And it's kind of fun to add humor to an issue that's often really heavy. Next slide. If you want to take action on our report, we have a toolkit on our website at bit.ly/tools plastic and climate. There's a slideshow you can use, sample letter to the editor, an action campaign, a media toolkit, and you can play around with the map. Next slide. And again, follow us on social media to stay updated with what we're doing. And sign up for our email list because we send a lot of information from our emails where we ask for money sometimes, but usually it's actions or information that we want to get in front of people to take action. Next slide. And you can donate, of course. I have to pitch this for our development director's sake. We love donations. You can send a check or donate online. And is that the last slide?
It looks like it is.
I think that's it. Okay, great. I just talked a ton, and happy to take questions.
Okay, so
and somebody put out. Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
I was going to say somebody pointed out that the LNG terminal is going to be in New Jersey, and that's my internet must be slow. Can you hear me? Okay.
That you do sort of get garbled at times, at least at my end. So just try again. I haven't been able to review the chat because I've been seeing your presentation on my screen, so I don't know what questions are in there right now until I get a chance to look at them, but feel free to jump in.
Hold on, I'm gonna try and connect to the sound on my phone.
Recording in progress.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, I think that's better. Thanks, Alexis.
Oh, great. So sorry. I hope I wasn't garbled during the whole presentation.
Not entirely, just here and there, at least at my end. I think we got the gist of it.
Okay. So somebody pointed out that the LNG port is in New Jersey, and I totally had that because the geography is like Delaware and New Jersey, but the rail lines or they would truck it through Delaware, and this is an issue before the Delaware River Basin.
It's definitely an issue to Delawareans, and there are people working on that issue as well. I'm not up on the latest details of what Peggy, I don't know if Peggy's on the call, she might be, or Sherry might know more, or if Coralie happens to be on the call, I know, I don't see her, but I know she's been working on it. If anyone else is on the call that knows more about the status of that, feel free to unmute.
I just thought we objected to boats going down the Delaware River with the liquefied natural gas. I didn't realize there was also going to be trucking.
Yeah, this was like a year, maybe 2 years ago that I heard about this. It was an issue before the Delaware River Basin Commission. I haven't gotten an update on it though.
This is Sherry. Excuse me. We've actually written a number of letters with adjacent states opposing the project because it involves dredging, it involves transporting liquefied natural gas, which is dangerous, and there are a number of other issues. And so that is an ongoing effort. The person who's most knowledgeable in Delaware is Coralie Pride.
Maybe we should do a lunch on that topic. Sherry might be a good one. I don't know if you've done one lately, but maybe we could get that together for an update from Coralie and whoever else.
Good idea. And I'm sorry, I should have said I'm with the Sierra Club.
Yeah.
I have recollection that this thing is impacted by the Coastal Zone Act because they want to put it up a shipping facility in New Jersey, right across from Claymont, in an old DuPont facility. And because of the way that the Delaware line is drawn, that facility would be in Delaware, technically, or at least the docks. And I think this has been to the Supreme Court several times. So yeah, it would be good to have a lunch discussion update because there's a whole lot of muddiness around this whole story.
Yeah, and the dredging would actually release sediments that are contaminated, and you'd be having these barges going down the Delaware, even though it's technically not located in Delaware, that it would have significant impacts.
All right, well, we'll get together to bring you more on that in the coming months. Alexis, I don't know if you've had a chance to look in the chat. Sorry, I've been busy. Let's see if there's any other questions out there right now, or if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. We're happy to have just a conversation and discussion.
I have a question. I put it in the chat, but is the Green Amendment being used to stop that facility in Pennsylvania?
I haven't heard of that, of the Green Amendment in Pennsylvania, but I have heard that nothing is likely to stop this plant, unfortunately. However, there is another plant that is proposed just downriver in Belmont County, Ohio, in Dill's Bottom, another ethane cracker, and the community there is organizing very hard to stop that cracker from breaking ground. It would be great if they could use the Green Amendment to sue to stop it.
If they're piping any of the LNG or natural gas or whatever across the state, then you would think the Green Amendment would kick in. Cheryl, I guess that'd be a great question for the Green Amendment folks, because I know they've used that for other pipeline fights, I think. I just don't know about this one specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Could someone tell us about the Green Amendment?
Can you send me or put in the chat the location of that facility in Pennsylvania, and I'll write to Maya about it, and I'll circle back with the group.
Yeah, I'm sure. Just shoot Coralie an email. She can send you all kinds of information, I'm sure. But I'll see what I can find.
I was talking about the plastic facility in Southwest PA.
Oh, not the LNG facility.
That's another conversation.
All right, we'll talk later. Fred, was that you that asked the question? So the Green Amendment is something that that was started actually in Pennsylvania quite a few years ago, where they actually got a constitutional line in their state constitution that says the citizens have the right to clean air, clean water, etc. And any project that's going to be considered must adhere to that right. Like, you can't take away that right. And they've used that law in Pennsylvania a few times to win some lawsuits against some specific projects, various projects, including, I think it was used next door to us here, just up in Delaware County, in the fight to preserve some land there, some of the woodlawn lands. Don't quote me on that, but I think so. And so the Delaware, if you go on the Delaware River Keepers website, they are the spearhead behind the Green Amendments across the country. I think there's only one other state that I think it's, is it Montana? I think is the only other state
That's what
that
I
has
think.
one.
I think
Montana?
Montana.
That
And
has
it was
it.
enacted in the 70s.
Yeah, a long time ago. And so anyway, there is a movement to try to get these in other state constitutions. There is a bill in draft form that might be introduced in Delaware this year. I'm not sure. Representative Medina Anton Wilson is, I think, taking the lead on that in Delaware. So you could reach out to her for more information on that. And but I don't think it's been introduced yet. And it has to, for Delaware, it has to be approved by 2 separate sessions of the General Assembly to be enacted, since it's a constitutional amendment. But anyway, so that's hopefully in the works for Delaware and other states as well. I think New Jersey is working on it as well. So what else have we got out there? Other questions? Richard, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. My question is in regard to the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is, I think, in the Senate, but it's been there for a while, and I think it's, right now, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. I think there were objections because there was part of it had a national deposit bottle bill type of thing in it. I'm not sure what other objections there were, or whether this is coming back alive, whether they're going to break it into sections. Alexis, do you have any information on where we are with the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act?
Yes. So the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is the most comprehensive plastic waste reduction and plastic pollution bill ever introduced. And a reason why it's controversial is that it really looks at the upstream impacts of plastic pollution and preventing plastic from being manufactured in the first place. So it's not dead. I'm happy to report that in the House, it has 121 co-sponsors right now, which is a lot more than many other bills. But of course, if you were like me reading the news at 11 o'clock last night to see what happened with the voting rights bill, the Senate is gridlocked right now. Something that the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act does that make it difficult to pass is the national bottle bill, like you said. So a bottle bill is a deposit on bottles and cans. You return it, you get your deposit back. I don't think you have one in Delaware. Am I correct? Yeah, we have one in New York, luckily. Only 9 states have bottle bills, and they've been around for 40 years.
We had one for many years, and then it disappeared a few years ago.
Judith reminded me, we are the only state in the whole entire country that got rid of our bottle deposit.
Goodness. So we need people to introduce bottle bills at the state level and get them passed. Another thing that the BFF-PPA does is it puts a 3-year moratorium on federal permits for new cracker facilities, new plastic manufacturing facilities. So that's a huge deal and something that we really need. But the American Chemistry Council and plastic makers are very powerful influencers on our lawmakers and our democratic system. So they have a lot of lobbying power and a lot of money to spend to prevent the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act from passing. So parts of it are going to be carved off. A national bottle bill is going to be introduced separately. A wet wipes bill is going to be introduced separately. And there's another bill, I think it's the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act, would make it illegal to discharge nurdles from ethane crackers into waterways. So nurdles are like tiny rice-sized pieces of plastic.
That's not illegal now? It's legal to put plastic into water?
They have, I don't know that it's necessarily legal, but they have like a certain limit and it's state by state. And nurdles are a big problem in waterways, especially in Texas and Louisiana. And I'm sure they will be in the Ohio River when that shell cracker comes on board. So yeah, parts of it are being carved off. I have met with Senator Coons. Was it with this group or was it with it? Yeah, have you guys heard anything from him on the act?
Not lately, no.
Yeah. So I would keep at him on it.
Are there any similar but maybe trimmed back bills in any state legislatures?
California just passed a suite of plastic pollution reduction bills, not like the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, but they did do a lot of things that were pretty bold. One thing that they did was they made it illegal for packaging manufacturers and producers to put the chasing arrow symbol on a piece of packaging unless they could prove that they achieve a 60% recycling rate for that material. So that's a huge deal because almost no plastic gets recycled at that rate. So now they can no longer put the chasing arrow symbol on most plastics, which the chasing arrow symbol has done a lot to mislead people into thinking that their plastic gets recycled.
And that it's called truth in labeling legislation, and it's something that Plastic Free Delaware is looking into right now as well. So if you're interested in being more involved in our effort here in Delaware to get a bill at the state level you know, get in touch with me. We have a policy committee that works on our proposed legislation, and happy to have any of you join us for those conversations. And as Alexis and Judith from Beyond Plastics, we've talked about even if there is a federal legislation introduced along the same lines, state legislation, you know, getting as many states as possible to pass these pieces of legislation is what will eventually encourage the federal level legislation to happen. So it's important for us to take the similar action here at the state level.
Yes. Another bill is extended producer responsibility, which Oregon and now Maine have that on the books. And that is just a piece of legislation that makes producers pay for the end of life of their packaging instead of having taxpayers pay for it. So Beyond Plastics, along with like the smartest minds that we know in the Plastic Pollution Coalition and Break Free from Plastic Pollution movement, have written a draft bill on extended producer responsibility that we hope people will take to their state houses. And we have other draft bills too on our website. Somebody asked about fees, like a carbon fee. I don't know what they meant by dividend, but we don't support a carbon tax or a plastic tax because the fact is that the wealthy can pay that and it doesn't effectively reduce the actual emissions or the actual production of plastic. We need a ban on producing single-use plastic.
Yeah, Ashley, let me follow. This is Jill, and I'm a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby. So let me follow up with you a little bit about that. The dividend portion of that is what makes it a fair and progressive kind of tax. So low income, I think it's the bottom 40% of people actually come out ahead if you include the dividend with that. So if I might, you know, in another arena, talk with you a little bit about that and see if we can just have a little educational piece. Would that be okay?
Yeah, anyone's welcome to email me. I just put my email in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question about your draft expanded producer responsibility bill. Does it also deal with the waste of the product when it's at end of life, or just the packaging?
No, it doesn't deal with the product, just the packaging.
So what are we going to do with washing machines and refrigerators?
In terms of end of life?
Yeah, and TVs and a zillion plastic things that we have end of life.
Yeah, there are other, California has some bills that deal with this. So they have legislation for mattresses and carpet. But I know most people or most states don't have that. Most municipalities don't have that. I don't have a good answer for that question. That was a very challenging question.
Well, I look at it as essential to expanded producer responsibility.
Yes, I think you're right. It's not in the same category as packaging, but it is in the same category as a circular economy. So we need legislation that prioritizes reuse and refill, but also remanufacture and repair. So laptops, cell phones, appliances, instead of just buying a new one when it breaks or designed obsolescence, we need to allow people the opportunity to repair the things that they use every day. And that's an economic opportunity too, because we can have specialists who have skills to do that and pay them to do that instead of buying a new appliance.
Delaware does have House Bill 22, which was introduced last year, a right to repair law introduced by Representative Ruth Briggs King. And we have been working on that. I'm not it's still alive this year because we have a 2-year session. So not sure where it's going to go, but that is something for those of you who hopefully all of you are on our Plastic Free Delaware email list. You'll be hearing more about that with action alerts and whatnot, because we're hoping it'll move forward this year. Senator Marie Pinckney is also partnering to try to move that bill forward. So the unfortunate part of that bill, HB 22, again, is Ruth Briggs King is from Sussex County, and she was approached by farmers who were concerned about being able to get tractors repaired because some of the large equipment like that is considered proprietary, and you would have to go back to the dealer to get things repaired. So the right to repair bill addresses things like that, but also cell phones and many other things that you can't get easily repaired, or you can't get access to even to open them up or get parts. But I don't think Representative Briggs King understood the environmental side of things. So if you actually look at HB 22, it doesn't really say much about the environmental benefits of right to repair. It's more about farm equipment and whatnot. But the bottom line is that the bill itself would address or improve right to repair, and it is an environmental issue. And it's unfortunate that the synopsis of the bill doesn't really address the environmental impacts, but it is something on our radar screen that we definitely support, and we'll see what happens this year, and if need be, come back next year with a rewritten bill that makes it more apparent of the environmental benefits. Okay, you guys, we still have some more time for Alexis's time, if anyone has any more questions. I will say what you mentioned, Alexis, about, one reason why I wanted to invite you here today and appreciate you being here today is something that even we don't at Plastic Free Delaware talk enough about, which is the climate change, sea level rise connections, or, basis behind our work in plastic pollution is something we need to emphasize more. And you made the point of, everyone working on climate change and sea level rise here in Delaware should be thinking about plastic pollution as an integral part of that conversation. And so I do appreciate you being here today to make that connection and help us move that conversation forward.
I wanted to toss something out, if I may.
Sure.
So earlier there was discussion about that we got rid of the deposit thing on containers, which I think actually is a virtuous move. In December, I reached out to Delaware Solid Waste Authority and asked them if I could get a tour. And earlier this week, I got a tour of the recycling facility as well as Pigeon Point landfill. And it was fun. It was a one-on-one. They have a schools program that is shut down right now because schools with COVID really can't do much of anything. So I had a 2.5-hour personal tour. I'm kind of curious. For one thing, I was impressed that we're actually single stream recycling. Basically, they have tipping into an area that they then put things onto belts. First thing they do is they crush the glass, and glass falls through it. There is no market for glass right now, so it's going off into asphalt extension and stuff like that. They then go through and separate, the ferrous materials come off easily with magnet. Then they separate the plastics out. They've got artificial intelligence sorters that segregate the polyester, the high density polyethylene. There are a lot of people on the line picking off the trash bags and stuff that would gum up the works. They ultimately get to a point where they use an eddy current separator that separates the aluminum materials out of the stream. And then the streams go off in their merry ways. One thing that I didn't get an answer to is, well, where does it actually end up? The high density polyethylene, no, I'm sorry, the polyester, the peak, number one. They say keep the caps on the bottles because it goes through the system better instead of getting collapsed and gumming up the works. But it goes off to Mohawk carpeting, which lops the caps off, shreds it, and turns it into new carpet. The other streams, don't know where they go. I also recycled electronics while I was there. I had 2 bins of stuff that my wife beat on me to get rid of some stuff. And so they have a series of containers down there that have different categories of electronics. Much to my delight and surprise, they have a container that takes polystyrene. And so if you've got bulk polystyrene, there's actually somewhere you can get it. God knows what they do with it, but there's a destination for it. It's free, it's inconvenient, it's on Lamson Lane. But you can get rid of stuff and hopefully have it go back into some productive use wherever it is they're disposing of it. It turns out that these are not state of Delaware operations. They're actually contracted firms. There's one firm that went bankrupt. I think it was like Reliance or something like that. And there's a new one that has been operating it. They basically have a lot of hands who are picking trash, and a lot of conveyors and a lot of stuff moving through that gets baled and shipped off to somewhere. There is also newly a second operation that is recovering construction materials. Completely different company. It's on the same site, different buildings. So they've got waste streams of wood that they shred, and it goes off to be chicken litter and stuff like that. A lot of aluminum from like siding, a lot of concrete that they crush and gets reused somewhere. And so I think we're doing some virtuous stuff. I'm not sure what visibility there is around it. I'm not sure where this stuff's actually going. I mean, China's pretty much gotten out of the game with taking our crap. And actually, it's the left coast that ships to China. Apparently, there are recycling, reusing facilities here on the East Coast that are doing something with this stuff. But anyway, just kind of an interesting update, I thought.
Thanks, Fred. We have had tours down there as well, and probably have more coming, depending on what COVID does to us these next few months.
Really?
We'll probably schedule one for anyone who's interested this spring. Part of the problem with, the single-use plastics and styrofoam specifically, as you said, who knows where it's going? I'm not totally sure styrofoam is getting properly recycled, but even if it is, what we need to get away from the single-use plastics, because they at most only get one more life. And that's less than 10% of them. The rest of them, as Alexis described well, are either ending up out in the ocean or in the environment or whatever. So the whole concept of single use is just not sustainable. And the landfill is growing. It's not shrinking. I mean, it's growing exponentially. It's not, the amount that's going in there is always more than the year before, not less. So we're working on these issues. Would love to have you get more involved. It sounds like you're interested. So let's connect.
And I just want to say, Beyond Plastics totally supports recycling, especially for metals and glass. I'm surprised to hear the glass wasn't being used, because that's what they make fiberglass insulation out of, is crushed glass. and paper. All of those, recycling all those things are really important. It's just difficult to recycle plastic, and often there's no end market for it.
Yeah.
And as far as the bottle bill goes, a bottle bill doesn't directly improve recycling, it improves collection. So in states that have a bottle bill, like Michigan, for example, has a 91% return rate on HDPE, which is the most valuable type of plastic in terms of recycling. But in states that don't have bottle bills, you don't have that economic incentive to recycle it. So they more often wind up as litter or landfill. And in states that don't have bottle bills, bottles and cans make up 40% of roadside litter. So it's all about the return and getting it back and sorted properly, and making the producer pay for it.
Yes.
Yeah. Alexis, it's always intrigued me if you've watched the movie Bag It, which we have copies of if anyone wants to see it. It's a little bit dated now, but the facts are all still there. But in that movie, they show that in Europe, they actually you can return your bottles to like a vending machine, at least in certain countries, and they get reused at least a certain number of times. I don't understand why that concept hasn't really been explored more here, or isn't more prevalent here in the US. I mean, I understand probably why it's not, but it's frustrating that it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's frustrating that glass bottles and jars don't get reused. They just get crushed.
Not like it's not
we can easily
possible,
solve that.
because we all did it in the 50s with the milkman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what I was referring to was actually plastic bottles, like
Right.
soda bottles and whatnot, in Europe, at least in some countries, get reused, cleaned out and reused, just like we do just like we used to do with milk bottles and whatnot. But yeah, I've never understood the thing about crushing glass either. And Fred, I'm gonna reach out to DSWA and ask that question, because it doesn't make sense to me that there's no market for glass right now. But
Well, the value is so low is the issue.
yeah, but so the question is, where is it going? Is it going somewhere to be reused?
I believe it is, to be honest.
Okay.
It just wasn't clear, and I wasn't diligent in drilling in on Stacy about, where is the stuff actually going.
Okay, I'll reach out, because got me curious now.
Yeah, but
Just,
if you look at plastic packaging, there's been, well, and aluminum as well. There's been ongoing drive to make it thinner and lighter and less and less and less. And so, Dee, what you're talking about in Europe, they would have to go with much heavier wall construction. They'd have to put in standardization of containers, the cleaning infrastructure. You'd have to build support amongst people that you get them clean enough, because who wants to have food come at you in somebody else's refuse? I mean,
But we used to do it in glass bottles.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and it used to have our dairy name on it, and Milkman would drop it off in that,
Aluminum box.
box that was outside the door. Yeah. No, I mean, some of us are older than dirt and remember that stuff. But
Okay, great. Well, any other last minute quick questions for Alexis before we let her go and let everybody go? All right. Well, Alexis, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate exploring this topic with you, and we look forward to keeping in touch as your grassroots project moves forward, and we look forward to working with you on things together.
Thank you. Before I go, the issue of the LNG terminal, if you're not in touch with Food and Water Watch, I know they've been really active on that issue, so they can probably tell you way more about it than me. But thank you so much for having me, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon.